Welcome to episode number 3 of the Veto. No guest this time around, but plenty to talk about going into the Katowice playoffs. And I think for pretty much the whole episode, we'll just do totally Katowice playoffs. So very quickly, Wolfie's here. You know that, all that stuff. Very quickly, the playoff format and the bracket looks like it is a 2-team straight advance to the semi-finals, and then there's quarterfinals around that. So in the top half of the bracket, the quarterfinal is Gambit versus NaVi. The winner of that is going to play Spirit, and obviously the winner of that goes into, I believe it's a best-of-5 final on Sunday. That will be. In the other quarterfinal, it is VP versus Astralis, and the winner of that one will play Liquid, of course, Liquid off the back of their win versus NaVi to win that group. And then potentially we might see some sort of really interesting matchup going into the grand final with all these teams going in. So let's just go straight into this one. Wolfie, give me any of these 6 teams. Where do you want to start? Which team piques your interest the most of these 6 teams going into the playoffs?
All right, fuck it. Let's start with Spirit.
Let's do it.
They're the hot team of the minute, right? They've got these performances behind them, taking down Astralis in the form that you do. I will admit, bitterly fucking disappointed we didn't see an ace on the second pistol to get the 16-0. That would have been something very special indeed. But I was saying this before, and I think I largely stand by it. I'm looking at the historic matchups for Katowice, and generally speaking, my biggest problem at the moment is there's so many teams going through sort of a flux period. There's so many teams swapping out players, making changes, having issues, that a lot of these matchups feel like, I don't want to say they're meaningless because they're not, but you can justify away these results with a worrying level of ease. Like, so for Spirit, right, in Katowice, they've beaten G2, they've beaten Heroic, they've beaten Astralis. So G2, we've had that discussion last week. They've been looking very mediocre. Obviously, they've gone out in some pretty stunning fashion. It's not the G2 we'd expect to see at all. They've looked very awkward in places. Nico seems to be messing with too much simultaneously. Semler dropped on that, so that's fine. That's done. Heroic, I think, started slow in my mind. They just didn't look like they hit the right gear at all. Getting 2-0'd by a team like Spirit, I don't care how good Spirit are, Heroic should be taking a map, at least their own fucking map pick, right? You're looking at a roster who have surprised is probably a strong word, but have really started to excel in the last, 2-3 weeks, month. They've really started to hit their ground running with these events. Heroic are a tenured roster. They've got experience. They've got trophies. They have to be beating at least a map out of these kind of teams. And then obviously the iconic Astralis result. But again, my problem with that is they just fucking imploded on Dust 2, right? It was some bold calls by Spirit. If you haven't watched Alan's video on it yet, just fucking go bang that one out. The amount of times that they dropped a deep B smoke and then just completely abandoned the B bomb site, and Astralis didn't fucking work that out. Like, they just consistently went into the stacks, went into the wrong places. They got fucking annihilated. And in my mind, if Astralis are getting fucking annihilated anywhere, then it's not the Astralis we expect. And I really do think coming into these playoffs, they are going to come back with a fucking vengeance. But for Spirit, I love them. They've looked incredible. But the bracket they've got, they're going to be coming up against, I mean, let's be real here, NaVi in the semi. And if NaVi can't beat Spirit, I'm asking some serious questions.
Yeah. Brutal take on the Spirit boys. Yeah, I agree mostly with the sentiment that, Spirit's still a team we haven't seen a terrible amount of at the top level, and this is definitely a team we're coming in mainly unsighted versus a lot of these teams. You even take a matchup like G2. G2 probably come into that for they're pretty big favourites and stuff. They might not prepped fully, thinking that other teams in their group was like the real competition for them. So they go into a matchup like that, and potentially G2, they have no idea how Spirit's going to play. And if you do watch my video on Spirit versus Astralis, you can instantly see that if you're playing a team like that and you don't know the sort of approaches they're going to take, you can just be in massive trouble because you just get totally blindsided. You've never seen anything like it before, or at least you're not used to this sort of style of play, especially on the CT side, and you just get run over. So yes, with Spirit, I'm certainly more optimistic than you might be, I think, about this Spirit squad, but cautiously optimistic is the word. the word I would use. The other thing about this Astralis series, which is obviously the one most people would use to defend why Spirit might be a real contender, is that in that series, Astralis picked into Train. Astralis would never have picked into Train if that was an elimination game instead of just it's for seeding when you play that winners match. So there is always a small asterisk. Even we'll talk about it later with the NaVi Liquid result. There is always even though it's a small asterisk, and certainly that NaVi Liquid game, they're both definitely trying to win the damn thing at the end. There is a small asterisk, and definitely in that veto for Astralis, I don't think there's any world in which they pick into Train if that is, a semi-final of a tournament, put it that way. So there are a few kind of asterisks with this Spirit result, but regardless, in kind of comparison to what you might have expected for a team like this before the tournament and now, definitely very, very good. And if you want to talk a bit about how this team actually plays as Spirit, they look a lot like VP to me, actually. On the CT side, very proactive. They take some risks. Again, if you watch my video on them, on Dust 2, you'll see that, as Wolfie was mentioning, literally every time 4 and 5 or they lost long, they just give up the B bomb site, totally risk it open, push into mid and take duels together. And that's a very Virtus.pro way of playing, where the instant you feel like you need some information, you just say, okay, we'll leave this area of the map open, we'll group together and we'll try and just do something. We'll be the proactive team. We'll be the one taking initiative. So as much as that might not always be a very consistent way to play, if someone doesn't know that's coming and you're being the proactive team and they don't know how to react correctly, you can just win games off that. So that's kind of my take on Spirit on the CT side. T side, to be honest, I haven't seen them so much, but I'm imagining this team a bit looser, a bit more kind of play off the individuals. They've got some very skilled individual players, even if they're not as experienced at kind of the overall team game. But the thing is, I have to say, when I look at a team like Spirit, my first thought about a team like Spirit is actually the scariest thing about these teams is that in like a year or so, this team will be so much better, and the kind of the growth they could have. And it's exactly the same with VP. When I watch these teams, they still make mistakes. Particularly, I was on Semler's stream the other day and we were watching a Spirit. It was actually the Spirit G2 game, actually. And in this game, they had a lot of communication errors, really, dare I say, basic mistakes for in the context of an IEM Katowice with the best teams in the world, they were definitely basic mistakes. So when I look at a team like Spirit, and we'll talk about this again with Virtus.pro, I look at them and I say, these teams could be seriously good in a year if they've got a year of top level competition to round out their play styles, to, being proactive alone isn't enough. You've got to actually make good decisions. So a year of refining them and they can be really, really strong. But at the moment, I'm still a bit cautious. And I think for Spirit, this break between the group stages and the playoffs is really bad for them, actually. I think if it had gone straight into a playoffs and they could keep playing the same way on some of these maps, they might have actually stood a chance of potentially knocking out a NaVi or something and making a final. But I have a suspicion with this break, there could be real problems for them, and I just don't see how they could have the depth for some of the other teams. If they're hitting a NaVi, if they're hitting an Astralis, if they're hitting a Team Liquid, these teams, I know all these teams have the depth. I know they could prep with time, and knowing these matchups for several days, they're going to be pouring through all the demos, and, some of these teams have big support staff, they're going to know exactly how you're playing. And for example, if they played Astralis again on Dust 2, I would take Astralis to win it, to be honest. I bet they would play completely different if they played them again. So yeah, with Spirit, in terms of predictions of them going forward, if they met Gambit, if Gambit pulled off the upset, sure, we'll take them for a final. If they play NaVi, I think I'm taking NaVi to win that, probably. You never know so much. There's a bit of kind of domestic matchup going on potentially, but even so, I'm not seeing them take out a NaVi, and I think we'll see Spirit finishing in the top 4. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been a bit harsh on them. I'm going to be quite pessimistic throughout this because I think a lot of these matchups can be explained away quite easily. They are an incredibly talented team. Don't get me wrong. Don't come at me on Reddit or Twitter. They are fucking fantastic to watch. Dexter is clearly going to be an incredible talent for them moving forward. And I think it's just a matter of, as you said, developing this roster, not losing any of the moving parts. Like the amount of times CIS teams shuffle and they just move players around and then completely lose what made them good in the first place is shocking. Just keep this core, build it for, fuck it. If I've got this kind of result immediately, I'm probably committing to 2 years, right? Get them some support, get them some backroom staff who can help them out. Because as you said, at the moment, they're an unknown entity. The break is going to give, the likes of NaVi, Liquid. I mean, fuck, Astralis will probably prep them as well. They're going to know everything that Spirit do. So they need time to work through that and get to the other side. But they are clearly a very solid team. I just think this is, it's a Quantum Bellator fire in a way. It's a fucking amazing result that I think is then going to start dipping again, and you've got to have the trust in the system to allow it to come back up to this level once again.
It's not a coincidence either that historically it's been teams from this region that have the very shocking upsets and the shocking results in tournaments, but it's because they don't play the same way as a standard top European team. They come with different looks of the game. They have a different opinion on the game, and if you're not used to playing against that, with players like Dexter, for example, they can, on an individual level, they can play against anyone. So if you're not used to playing this sort of team, you haven't done your prep properly, you're just going to get knocked out by them. They are actually good enough to take. Or obviously they beat Astralis, and you'd even take Astralis just playing good fundamental CS to probably beat almost anyone in the world. So that was a very good result. I have to say, watching Dexter, he's not someone in the past I've watched a lot of, but he's seriously good, this guy. And we'll talk a bit about Shiro as well later on. These up and coming CIS AWPers, they beat the shit out of Europe's up and coming AWPers at the moment. They're so good, and there's exactly the same stuff as I was talking about with Spirit overall as a team. You look at some of these players, and you're like, you give these guys a real year of top level competition, because you have to remember, for a team like Spirit, for a team like Virtus.pro, they're not getting invites to all the tournaments. They're not playing in all the big tournament on tournament. They haven't got all the experience versus the top teams. And potentially moving on from this, if they're getting the invites to the top events, just imagine if they play 10 big events over the year and get the consistent practice, the consistent experience in the server playing versus these top teams. He plays against a Cerson, a device as simple as Zywoo, and they learn how to AWP like these players. It's irreplaceable actually playing against these sort of players in the server and seeing how they're physically beating you, and then you learn so much in the process. So with Spirit as a whole, as well as someone like Dexter, at the moment, very, very impressive for what we might have expected with someone of his experience level. But really, for me, I'm looking in a year or so for these sort of players to really be punching in at the top level. If they did have a great result here, make a final, even win the whole tournament, that'd be unbelievable. But I'm more so looking at these sort of players in the future instead of right now, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Who's next on the to-do list? Should we just go through all the guys who've come out of that bracket? I think going on to NaVi next would be fun, seeing as I've got the predicted to win the whole thing.
Tell me why then. Tell me why.
Because they're the only team whose results seem valid. I'm going to sound like such a dick saying this, but I looked and I researched and I prepped for this, and I looked at the matchups and I just started explaining away games in my head. And that sounds stupid, but I started looking at matchups and I was thinking about all these things we've spoken about in the last 2-3 episodes of rosters and changes and how that affects a team and all this. And I was just looking at other people's results and going, well, that can explain this. I mean, for NaVi, right, you've got a 2-0 against what is looking like a very strong VP team. We'll touch on it later, I'm sure, but they are looking solid. I think NaVi, if they started slow, which I personally think they always seem to fucking do, they always seem to drop maps first series out. They always seem to be a little bit slow at the gate. Simple always seems to take at least a map to get into his game mode again. If they'd done that against VP, there was a real opportunity for some punishment to start coming through. But they managed to find a clean 2-0 there. They go on to Furia, which is where my sort of explaining it away starts to happen, because I look at that and I go, okay, you're bringing Junior into the system. You're trying to work out how this new NA AWPer fits into a hyper-aggressive system. And at times it worked fantastically, and at other times the wheels seem to fall off a little bit. So I look at that and I go, okay, I can understand NaVi beating a Furia. And then the third one, obviously, the Big Banger series, the double OTs at the end of it, or triple, whatever the fuck it ended up being. You put an asterisk next to that. Just a small one, but you go, that's not actually for a spot. That's for seeding. That's for quarters or semi-finals. And as much as, yes, both teams will want to win that match, there's professionalism in this, a guaranteed semi-final spot's one less best of 3 to prep for. it's not the end of the world to be losing that matchup. It's not NaVi aren't going to make it to playoffs for Katowice if they lose that match. So as much as it's awkward and it's not great to see them losing, the last match they get before they go into guaranteed knockout rounds, I can explain it away ever so slightly, despite Simple pulling off some fucking antics on that T side.
Yeah.
So for me, NaVi have got the most valid results out of the bunch. They've looked consistently strong for a long time now. I mean, I'm looking, and the last time they were actually beaten was the 20th of January by Liquid again. So
yeah,
they've got a nice.
They also won that tournament where they lost to Liquid, so exactly. Even that one, yeah.
They've got this nice spree of events. They've got a lot of momentum behind them. They've looked really solid throughout this tournament. I do think Boomblitch, sometimes his calling seems a little off when he's having a bad game personally. He seems to be I want to say an Apex caller, where if he's playing well, he seems to call these god level strats. And if he's having a shit game, then it can look a little bit disjointed. But for me, and it was the state at the play-ins, it was all the way through. For me, NaVi are the best team in the world right now, and they should be winning this tournament. I think having that kind of presence behind you with a player like Simple, who's now had, 5, 6, 7 maps to warm up, they are going to be very, very difficult to stop.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are the best team in the world. On the VP result, that one was really surprising. So I was watching that live on stream with Sniper. You might know him. I think he used to call for Immunity back in the day, and I think now he works in broadcast and stuff in the Australian broadcast and all that. And me and him were watching this game. Going into the match, I thought it was going to be a free mapper and a really close series because Virtus.pro, they're actually on a free tournament win streak at the moment with Flashpoint, with DreamHack, with CS Summit. And, you can make the cases they don't get invited to all the really big events and stuff, but they beat all the competition put in front of them, those tournaments. I think they lost at Sweet Snow or whatever it's called, but, why would you even try that if you've won $500,000 at a Flashpoint? I don't even know why they enter those sort of tournaments, to be honest. So yeah, that first result versus VP was very surprising, and we'll talk about it more with VP later, but I think just NaVi put them under so much pressure, and they had so many T rounds in that series, and it looked like VP crumbled a little bit to me. Yeah, they just weren't... as we were talking about with Spirit, you consider VP to be a really proactive team, and they just weren't being the proactive team at all in that match, and NaVi was taking it to them every single round, and they just had no... I remember particularly when me and Sniper were watching the Dust 2 game, we just sat there saying, when are they actually going to adapt? When are they going to change anything? They've been running the same setups every round, and NaVi's just eating them alive. So that game... That was a bit odd. I'm not exactly sure what was going on, but certainly from the NaVi perspective, you do look at this team. They do start slow in some tournaments. I think, I don't know, it's always been that way, I think, for some of these players. And, how can you get excited for the first match of the series, of the tournament sometimes when potentially you're someone like Simple and I think it's actually Simple is always pretty consistent. It might be some of the others, maybe Electronic, for example. Maybe some of them can't get fired up for these first games, but that first game was just unbelievable. So you can't really ask for better than that. And then they win the second round group final, of course, versus Liquid. Inferno down to the wire. It was double OT. That was a bit of an odd game at the end. So historically, people rave about Inferno as a third map of the big series, and kind of the reason Inferno gets raved about is because teams have like a gentleman's agreement on Inferno not to really press the issue until the late round. So what will happen a lot is everyone just plays slowly, puts their nades down, and then you get into like a late execute. And that's why it's really exciting to watch, because you're on like match point and it's just an execute with barely any nades, and it's just a 4-on-4 like on the bomb site, and there's trades all over the place, and you have the round like Simple where you almost 1v4s it to actually get the map over the line and all that. So that's why it's so exciting. But actually, from a strategic or tactical perspective, I don't think that game actually ended very well. It was really scrappy. Really, some individual highlights were kind of very prominent in that game. And to be honest, in terms of that series of Liquid NaVi, I think NaVi were the better team in that series. They might not have won it. They won more rounds in the series, and I think they were the better team on Inferno until it hit overtime. So even though they lost that one to Liquid, we have some small asterisks, and I do think if they weren't better than Liquid, they were on par with Liquid definitely in that series. So all these things combined together, I do think they are the best team in the world. I think Simple is definitely the best player in the world right now. Obviously, maybe Zywu hasn't got the team around him at the moment to always be on the big stage right now, at least until whatever's gone on with Apex can sort itself out. But right now, Simple is the best player. He might be a bit reckless sometimes, a bit aggressive, a bit wild, but he's just money at all times in the round. Entry, late round, CT side, T side, it doesn't matter. As long as this guy's alive, a round isn't over, as Liquid almost found out in that 30th round and final regulation round on Inferno, where he almost got that 1-on-4. So that was crazy. So NaVi's a bit mad. They play some crazy CS. I made a video recently all about the tactical side of NaVi. The whole point I was trying to make wasn't necessarily that they're a super tactical team, is that when they need to bring out the set rounds, they're really, really great. And it's just their choice of how they like to play. They like to give the individuals more space to potential reason that Boomich has issues calling around himself when he hasn't putting up the individual frags is because he likes to give himself a lot of space on the T side, likes to kind of call stuff around himself or do stuff individually and say, I'll do this, you guys do this. So maybe if he's having a weaker game individually, that limits his options and he has to fall back on set stuff he's not comfortable with. But the point I'm trying to make is that they are actually a much more complete team than people realize, and you just fundamentally wouldn't be the best team in the world if you, at least in this day and age, unless you had rock solid fundamentals, rock solid team play and communication, all this. So from all angles, I think Na'Vi still are maybe not heavy favorites. It's just that I can't necessarily see a really strong case for anybody else being the favorite to win Katowice at the moment. Quite a few people would say Liquid after that result, but I've seen Na'Vi do it consistently now for a few tournaments, always punching in the big results, always having a solid map pool. Simple, every single game he's just the best player in the server. What more could you ask for from an individual player than what Simple brings to the server? It's just unbelievable. We take someone like Electronic. I think Electronic's an interesting player because he's a much smarter player than anyone gives him really credit for in the community. And I've just written down an example here in my notes. Someone like Stewie2K is someone that people have raved about for years as being someone that's got incredible intuition and he knows when they're in the smokes and he can push through all this bullshit that doesn't actually mean anything. Like Electronic, I think he's a much smarter player than Stewie. I think the way he makes decisions is really incredible, and basically nobody talks about it. So I'm talking about it. Electronic is the shit. Buy your Electronic stock now before he wins the tournament. But he's definitely someone that he's really great at making decisions. And with how Na'Vi plays, where they give the players a lot of space, Electronic can make some great reads alone and just win them rounds. And you add that into an overall system and Simple, what is there not to like apart from maybe this flamey bit situation isn't perfect? What's there really not to like about Na'Vi? It's hard to flaw them particularly. Map pool looks great at the moment, so and then obviously if we're picking them to win the event, we're expecting a Gambit win. I don't think we need to talk too much about that. The only angle I could see an argument for is domestic matchup, but I think for years that hasn't really mattered, domestic matchups. I wouldn't have thought Na'Vi particularly practices the CIS teams any more than they would the top European teams. I don't see why they would, even if maybe they're a bit concerned about ping and stuff, but you're just going to get so much better practice against the top European teams, and there's millions of them. They're always online, so you can always find games. So,
don't skip this yet. We've got to talk about it. Did Simple overplay the clutch?
Yes and no. I mean, it was presumably you're referring to Sadakis's tweet immediately after saying that he overplayed it. Yes. He came out with some long spiel about I can't remember what it exactly said, but yes, I know the gist. Yes and no. Yes, if you want to play it at 0.25 speed and watch it back, he made a mistake. He shouldn't have tried to jump onto cold, that's what's called, and try and face it. But he's just got 3 kills in a 1 versus 4. He's playing off pure feel at that point. He's not thinking. He's just playing off raw feel. So he's just gonna press buttons on his keyboard. That's just gonna happen. So yes, in isolation it was a mistake. You could make a video about it if you really wanted to, about how he made an error, but it was so in the moment and he'd already made the impossible almost happen. So Yeah. If it was any other player, that would have just been one kill and just got died. So
yeah, true.
Wouldn't even
I
got to that
just wanted
point.
to get your opinion on it. I was just like, because I saw the tweet and I was like, you can see it and you can see that it's a mistake, but you're absolutely right? You put Simple in this impossible situation. He gets two. I don't know what he's done to his CZ to make it better than mine, but he gets two quick headshots with a CZ, which shouldn't be possible to start with. Hits a nutty AWP flick for the third, and I think at that point, it's harsh, but like you almost want to forgive him, but in my mind, you can't. I know, like if you're gonna put the argument out there for him being the best player in the world, I think decision making has got to be coming into it, and I don't know. I'm torn because I agree with Sadokist's tweet, but I agree with your opinion as well that at that point he's playing it on pure feel. I do just wonder though if he needs to maybe learn, and it's going to be very difficult to learn. Don't get me wrong, because you don't get put in those situations every day. But if he takes half a second there to just go down, he realizes he's got a bomb plant. He's got great position on Stewie. He's got potential to just buy time and put the pressure back onto the CT player coming into that bomb site, right? So I do wonder if maybe he can just, if you can just take half a second just to go, and this is the situation, I think maybe he makes a better decision there. But it's a difficult one to call because there are very few players in the world who can put themselves in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I have to watch it back. I don't have a clue if he knew Stewie was on that side in the first place. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't make much sense to jump up there if he knew he was short, or perhaps, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's just a tiny mistake, and you could even make the argument that if he wasn't playing a bit reckless, there's no way he could have got that into 1-on-1 in the first place. It was only because he was going for the crazy flicks. If he sits there and tries to plant, or like he tries to play it slowly, he just gets swarmed in, has no chance. So that's why it's quite difficult to criticize him, because he'd never got it to 1-on-1 if he'd played it slow and standard. It's only because didn't matter if there's no saving, it was the last round of the game, he just went wild and tried to dome everyone. And there's no other player in the world probably that could have got that to 1-on-1. Maybe Zywoo. That's it. So have we done NaVi? Oh, and of course, in terms of the Spirit, we should probably talk a little bit about the Spirit matchup, because that probably will happen, to be honest. I can see it going 3 maps, but as we talked already, NaVi, a lot of class. I think they're probably underrated in the prep department. Someone like Blaze probably in contention for the best coach in the world, and he's another name that nobody really floats in that conversation. So yeah, and for someone like, I've seen loads of games where someone like Electronic changes up small things, or like he uses his nades in certain ways, definitely from watching other demos. So yeah, I mean, they've got 4 days. They're probably prepping for Gambit and Spirit. So yeah, I'll be taking NaVi in that game.
For sure.
Done, NaVi?
Yeah, I think we've covered them.
Give me a new team.
Can't say too much about the winners. Right, next on my list, I have got Astralis. I think that's a good place to go. Who, again, I look at their results and I don't want to do it, but I justify them away. So, Astralis, right? Games they've played. They 2-0 Mousesports. Okay, Mousesports have got a new in-game leader. They're building into this new system. They picked up A-Core pretty damn recently as well. You're looking at what I would call a catastrophic change for a roster, right? You're talking a new AWPer, you're talking a new in-game leader. Those are 2 of the biggest parts of a 5-man CS team. I think for Mouse, I think they were pretty competitive on a few maps this series as well. They took, 12 rounds on Inferno. That's not bad at all against Astralis, who, at one point were pretty much considered the de facto perfect players of Inferno. Like the perfect CT half of Inferno was to use your utility like Astralis. So taking 12 rounds off them, that's no mean feat. Then the next matchup they get is EG. What the fuck happened to EG? They just didn't show. Like it was, I don't know. Again, I don't know what's happened to EG. I look at them and they make sense, and then they get in the server and suddenly they don't. Astralis just looked like they were scrimming against a tier 2 team at times. It was just all too easy for them. Obviously, Zipex having a blinder of a game is always going to help. I mean, I'm looking at 1.53 across 2 maps, but I think in my mind, EG made it easy for them. And then obviously the big upset, everyone wants to talk about it, Spirit beating them 2 maps to 1. Lack of prep. I'm going to just throw that excuse out there very early on that 3rd map. man. You've got to punish, and I think we'll see teams doing it a lot more if they do end up picking into Dust 2. If they're throwing that B smoke, that deep B smoke, you're just popping a flash over the top of tunnels and going out and seeing what the situation is, right? Because they do it, as you said, in a disadvantageous position. So you're already a man up. If you've got like a fucking Mac 10 or even Tech 9 CZ, pop flash him over, get the info if they've had to adjust to now holding the B bomb site because you've fucking blown up their strat of completely leaving B. And that's going to be super exploitable. I think other little bits and pieces are going to start to be worked out. And it's going to be very difficult for Spirit to replicate that. For Astralis, I want to think that they're coming into this pissed. That's what I want from Astralis. I want an Astralis that is mad that we're calling them out on their shit, that is going, we want to prove we're the best 5 players in the world again, even though they keep making up bullshit excuses about Bubsky. Have you seen the latest one?
Yeah, well, I know that. Well, he said in an interview today or something, didn't he, that he's going to, they want to put him back on multiple maps, but for the moment, they're just using the 5-man roster. It's all very, very strange. I haven't read through all of exactly what he said, but so it was all a bit odd.
So the bit that was really fucking weird is they basically said they wanted to use him as a 6th man right up until Valve said no to 6-man rosters, which was well, but you haven't been using him properly before that either. We've seen how to use a 6th man properly. We've seen it with Vitality, right? You weren't using him effectively, and you've just been given a fucking great excuse to go, oh, yeah, we really, really meant to. And then Valve, oh, fuck Valve. Why are they doing this to us? They've ruined our system. So Astralis need to get away from that shit. And in my opinion, they need to do it pretty damn quickly. They need to stop fucking about with a 6-man roster if they're not going to do it properly first time out the gate. I mean, Bubsky's he's in fucking ESEA cash cups, for fuck's sake. He's not an Astralis player at the moment. He just isn't. And if they can come out the gate pissed off about all the shit we've been talking about them on this podcast and everywhere else on Twitter, and can start to really play their brand of CS again, I want to think they can make the run. My problem is I look at that Liquid semi. I think they'll take VP. I think it'll go to 3 maps, but I think they can take VP. I'm happy to commit to that prediction. That semi-final against Liquid, I just think Moses is going to have spent 2.5 days of this 4-day period prepping that Astralis game, right? Getting them into that final. And I think Astralis, with the way they've been showing up recently and almost sort of copping out of certain games. I mean, again, you always go to Spirit on Dust 2, but I want to talk about the train game as well, I think. Let's go check the maps to make sure I don't chat shit.
Yeah, maps. Yeah,
the train game. Astralis' map pick, right? So they've stolen Inferno off of Spirit, and then they go on to train. That map pick that you said was a bit odd and a bit weird, and they don't pick that if it's a semi-final. In my mind, if you're picking it, you've got to fucking win it. I don't care if it's an odd pick or if you're saving strats. If you're picking into train against a team who you've just stolen their map pick, right? You've just taken Inferno off them. You've put them on the back foot. You've got to be taking it. You've got to be taking that 2-0. You've got to be putting the message out there. We're Astralis. We're back. If they'd done that, they would have been flawless through groups, right? They would have taken 3 2-0s. That's Astralis going, we're back. We're going to take Katowice. We're going to beat the best teams in the world again. Them getting clobbered on Dust 2 and their own map pick or train against Spirit is just not the Astralis I expect to see. And from that, I sort of go, that semi-final against Liquid, with Liquid on the kind of form that they're starting to hit now and that system starting to work again, I think Liquid take that personally. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That one's probably one of the hardest games to predict, assuming it plays out in the whole tournament. There is one kind of fact about these formats that we should probably mention, is that the team that wins the group very famously almost never wins the tournament in this format, the jump to the semis. Yeah. I can't remember. It was certainly in something like 2017, it was still the case that it would never happen. It never happened. The team that won a group had never won the tournament. And I can't think off the top of my head, but I'm willing to bet it's sub 5 teams ever have won the group and then won the tournament with this format. If that kind of is a bit of proof that final winners game, just for seeding, might not always be totally indicative of what you will see in the rest of the tournament. Yeah. So maybe you put that against the Astralis result there. As we said, they had wins over Mouse and EG, but I mean, they beat the teams in front of them at the end of the day in those games, but Mouse roster change, EG, wildly inconsistent. Looked like a blast. They'd on a bit of a road back, but here had some good results, but ultimately couldn't make the playoffs. So not of that sort of high-end caliber are EG at the moment. I play against Spirit. Train pick, fucking weird. That was the sort of pick I'm fairly convinced where it's either the case they wanted to play it in official or they fairly good in scrims on Train and they thinking that maybe they want it to be a potential pick map as a punish pick. Thing is about Spirit is they're pretty decent on Train, and I'm fairly sure Spirit picked it into G2 in that game. So Spirit, Train is definitely an okay map for them, if not on the upper end of their map pool. So from all angles, that Train pick was very strange, and I'd say I'm dead certain that doesn't happen outside of a game for seeding, to be honest. If it was for elimination, I see almost no way. On the Dust 2 game, they got completely blindsided. Watch my video on it if you want to see a bit more about how that actually played out. But as you alluded to, if you knew that Spirit was going to always react in that way, I mean, you can just do. There's so many options you could do as long as you know they have that reaction. But all you'd have to do is take long with a couple of players, and then how they're going to react. And there's loads of different ways you could exploit it. You could leave an AWP on the mid doors. You could explode out B with 3 players. There's endless options of what you could do. You could commit long potentially quite quickly, and whilst they're all grouped in mid. So they were very predictable with doing that. Obviously, Astralis didn't work it out in game. Otherwise, they would have adapted and tried something different. So that one, I don't think that result will happen again. It might still be a fairly good map for Spirit against Astralis, but there were too many rounds in that game that essentially played out in the same way or a very similar manner. That I don't think would happen again. Even with no prep, I think it wouldn't play out again. I just think Astralis, even from in the server, would know roughly what to do against it. And I bet for sure they came out of that game and they spoke for 10 minutes afterwards after watching back on the casted VOD. And they watched it back. They're like, for fuck's sake, guys, they're mid every round. Every round, that bloody Mir guy was pushing in mid. That's what they would have been saying in the team speak afterwards. So, Astralis, I still think they could win the tournament, to be honest. They've had some questionable results. Obviously, the Blast groups came out in second to last place, only beating OG. And then tournament before, they did reach the final, but the grand final versus NaVi wasn't very convincing. So you have these 2 events in a row, and then obviously this loss versus Spirit, even with some asterisks and a wacky veto, you should still be beating Spirit as Astralis, to be honest. It shouldn't even be a particularly close game, in my opinion, with the depth that Astralis has with their map pool, with the players. You should almost be able to adapt on the fly and play a fairly standard game and beat a Spirit. I mean, you should just be such a much more well-rounded team. So from that angle, you'd come into this one, you say they might not be in great form, but with your sentiment of saying that they might come in pretty hot, I think they will come in pretty well into this playoffs. They're a team that, unlike Spirit, they will definitely benefit from this break between the groups and the playoffs to play themselves into form, to go over a few things, to make some changes on Dust 2, potentially, these sort of maps. I could only see them getting better. And for a team like Astralis, where they've played all the big lands and they've had incredible success, the deeper they get into a tournament, the bigger the matches, even losing a game versus Spirit, all of these motivated together would make me think coming into the playoff portion of this tournament, you might see a very different team, and you might see the team that just destroyed EG in that series, for example. So, but talking more specifically, they're playing VP in this first game. The interesting thing about this game versus VP is the veto that's going to be happening. So, Astralis will ban Mirage, which is one of VP's favourite maps. VP will ban Nuke, which, even though it's been a bit iffy, Astralis would definitely be willing to pick it into a team like VP. So you take those 2 out, and then the map picks, I have no idea what Astralis are actually going to pick into in this series. because Inferno, they're actually flawless on it at the moment in the last few events are VP. And it was historically VP's pick over the end of last year. It's always been a strong map for them. They looked okay on it so far in Katowice as well. So I don't think Astralis can pick into Inferno. It might be the case they think they're just the better team and they're going to pick into it themselves. So as soon as you get away from Inferno, then it becomes a bit more questionable for them, because I think they've had pretty rocky results on quite a few maps. It's not like it used to be, where it used to be Nuke Inferno and then they just win it against anyone. So after that, I'm not sure what they're going to pick into versus VP. And if I had to guess, given the break, they probably picked a map like potentially an Overpass. I wouldn't be gobsmacked if they actually practiced whatever maps are even in the pool. They won't pick Inferno. Dust 2, I wouldn't be absolutely gobsmacked if they picked a Dust 2, to be honest. So there's a few ways they could go with the map pool, but with the map pool, how their map pool plays off each other, they've actually got a lot of kind of crossover in the middle of their map pool. And I think you could see a very good actually free map series. I mean, we were saying the same going into the NaVi VP game, I guess. But they're kind of the middle of their map pools are very, very similar. And I think you could see a close free mapper in that game, even though I'm going to take Astralis to win it. And we'll probably talk about VP a bit later on. I can still see that being very close, but I'll take Astralis to win that one. And then getting back to your question a few minutes ago of them against Liquid, assuming that matchup happens, I'm not quite as sold on Liquid as everyone else is. Recent in-game leader swap and all that, and it's just fundamentally I can't see them having that much depth. They've probably got pretty decent depth kind of strategically and map pool wise, but not as much as Astralis, that's for sure. So I'd have to think about the veto of that one, but I mean, it's hard to say until you see it, until I'd seen a VP Astralis quarterfinal. But assuming Astralis comes through that in fairly good fashion, I'd probably take them to beat Liquid. Liquid in the semi, I think.
I think you're being a bit harsh on Liquid. I feel like those semis are where it really gets interesting in terms of picks. That's where I really find myself like jumping between the two teams, because half the time I look at it and I go, it's Astralis, man. It's Astralis. They always blatter their way through teams. They can make this work. And then the other half of me, that little bit of me goes, you saw what Liquid did against NaVi. You saw what they're capable of, and Astralis have been slow. They've been a little bit off the pace. They haven't looked like themselves. So I've got to stick with Liquid, and I'd love to see Liquid in the final of a big tournament with this lineup. And I think they could, honestly, I think they could do some damage. But I can see your point. Astralis, they are the team, right? They're the team we always expect to come through with some big results. And I think it will take a huge performance again from Liquid, like the one against NaVi, if they are going to stand a chance of making that final.
Yeah, well, irrespective of the winners, what we should get with this bracket is 2 or 3 really good series out of this playoff bracket, assuming we don't get some upsets early on. Because if you had a theoretical, Astralis Liquid semi into a NaVi Liquid or Astralis final, there's 2 killer series there. I have a feeling the VP Astralis game could be really, really good, assuming VP shows up in kind of their top end form instead of what we saw versus NaVi in their opening game. So, irrespective of who actually wins this game, this is probably one of the best playoff brackets I've seen, at least in recent tournaments. I know the top end's a bit odd with all the CIS teams somehow getting there together, but because the other interesting thing that happened was that Astralis lost their game. Which way round was? Yeah, Astralis lost their game first versus Spirit. So there was a bit of an odd situation where whoever lost out of Liquid NaVi would kind of have the easier bracket because they wouldn't have Astralis on their side of the bracket. I'd never say that actually played a factor in the game, but it's always a bit interesting when, actually losing that match gets you like a Gambit Spirit side of the bracket versus an Astralis side to actually make the final. So that's always an interesting thing that's going on. Let's talk about Gambit. I mean, we've kind of, as you already kind of worked out, listening, we kind of not necessarily, well, we have written them off, I guess. I don't think it's 100% cut and dry, but I mean, in the first place, making a playoffs here is a very good result. And obviously, we brought up Gambit last time with Sembler, and I made the point that I do think at some point they were going to hit in a good result, and they've done it immediately here. So you know, you can say I'm a genius if you want, but I was just quite confident from seeing them in other tournaments that if you give them a big stage and a few events, they would have done it. I wouldn't have said they're going to do it immediately, regardless. But I'm not as surprised as most people would be that they've got a result like this and already made it to the playoffs, beating Heroic and G2. G2 might have their problems, but Heroic, I mean, they had a bit of an iffy tournament, but they're still Heroic. They still were at times last year a top, I don't know, 3-4 team in the world, bottoming out at top 8 worst sort of team. And they also had a 12-3 T side on Mirage versus Heroic in their game, which is really impressive for a team like Gambit. Heroic's best map isn't Mirage, but Heroic's played a lot of Mirage over the last year, and it's a map everyone knows roughly how to play, especially on the CT side. So to take 12 T rounds as a team where, you know, we're not sitting here saying that Gambit's the best terrorist team in the world. We wouldn't expect that much. We wouldn't expect so much great strategy and stuff. But regardless, to get that result alone and then ultimately make it into the playoffs is very, very impressive. I think a bit like the Spirit angle, this is another team that coming in unseen, not knowing a lot about how they were going to play, not knowing much about the players would have definitely helped them. And on the same vein, going into the playoffs, I mean, the thing is they've already got NaVi, so it might not maybe be a massive factor because they probably play each other a fair amount in the first place. But had they got like an Astralis in the quarters, that would have just been like a death sentence, giving Astralis 4 days to prep versus a Gambit. But yeah, I think that would have helped them. But I have to say, in terms of like the organization and them finding talent, I mean, this used to be the Gambit youngsters team. Like how they managed to get all these players together that most of them we haven't heard of so much before until the last 12 months or so, like how they've actually managed to collect so much talent in one team and actually put in results which for like the players they have and the experience they have outside of Hobbit, this is really impressive for them to even make it this far in the tournament. So as much as, you know, we're talking here about the playoffs, talking about who this is really a conversation of who is the best team in the world, essentially, this playoff bracket. As much as we're ruling them out of this equation, we're saying, come on, you know, NaVi going to beat them. Making it this far is very impressive. And again, a lot of props to kind of, you know, whoever scouted these players. It might have been luck, but whoever scouted these players, I don't know. Presumably they picked them all up as separate parts into their youngsters team instead of having a roster from the get-go. But whoever made the decisions to, even if it was a whole team, to find these players, like props to them, because this is real finding of talent instead of most of the other academy teams where they're just like a piss take and it's just like get 5 young players in there and hope one of them's good enough to like sell. Now you've got them under a big buyout contract. Like, like this youngsters team is like way better than Astralis' youngsters team. Like, it's not even debatable. Yeah, so props to those guys. Good results so far. I mean, we haven't got high hopes for them in the quarters, to be honest. They've got a pretty tough draw with NaVi. But yeah, I'm impressed with Gambit and how they made it to the playoffs.
Yeah, I was just looking. They signed all 5 as the initial. It looks like they signed a guy called Poria initially and then swapped him out for Hobbit after a bit. There's definitely some juggling around that goes. They've got a guy called Supra who they signed as well. But like the core talent of picking up Shiro, Inters, Nafani as new, young, talented players to come out is insane. And I casted a fair bit of them. They sort of were coming up at about the same time I was coming up through ESEA Advanced and starting to get into the premieres and that kind of thing. And they always looked good. Their problem was their inconsistency. They were this team that when Shiro showed up, it was the Shiro show. It was just, and interestingly, he always turned up on Mirage. So I think that definitely played into their hands against Heroic. But he was this one-man wrecking ball, and if he showed up, it looked fantastic. It looked amazing. You were going, why are these teams still in advanced? But if he didn't, the wheels just fucking came off, and they couldn't play functional CS without him. And I think that's where bringing in Hobbit, bringing in that experience, that anchor, really gives you something to these sort of rosters. And I mean, like we said, they aren't going to make it very far in this bracket. Let's be real. They've got NaVi first up. That's a rough fucking draw. That's never going to go well for them. But I think maybe taking a map, they can take a lot of confidence out of that. Obviously, finishing top 6 of IEM Katowice, that is a serious accomplishment for a roster who, until 6 months ago were fundamentally playing on an academy team. This is
it's crazy.
A serious amount of talent that they've managed to pluck out of what seems to be thin air, right? It seems to be that they've just found all these incredible players and built them a system that seems to be firing on all cylinders. And I think they're very much in the same boat as Spirit in that give them a year, give them some more of this level of event, start getting them into those A tiers, those S tiers, and start really putting them consistently against these kind of opposition. And that CIS dominance that we were talking about last episode with Semler could really start to come through. Because, we've got 2/3 CIS teams. Yeah, 2/3 CIS teams at Katowice this year.
Oh, sorry.
And you're looking at it. Come on, I can do it. I've got a degree, man. I can do maths. But you're looking at it and you're going, realistically, I'd expect 2 of those teams to only get better with time. I don't see, there might be a dip, sure, and I think there probably will be a dip for both Spirit and Gambit, but I'm expecting them to improve from this result moving forward. I'm expecting them to become a better team, a more well-rounded team, a team with more strats, more backing, more time against top 10 teams in the world. It really builds you out and it puts flesh on the bones, right? It gives you a little bit more. That's terrifying. If you've got rosters with, players who've only been on the main team for 6 months, Degsters who've come off of Sparta, which is essentially Spirit's Academy, and you've got them immediately fucking performing, then what the hell is going to happen in a year? And I think that's where Gambit have got to look. It's unfortunate for them, but that's what you've got to do, right? You've got to be looking at 6 months, 9 months, a year. Katowice 2022, if Gambit have this same 5-man roster and they continue on the curve that they are hitting at the moment, those are my 2 caveats. They're a top 3 team next year. If they continue on everything they've been doing up until this point, they are a guaranteed semi-finalist next year. If they lose Shiro to a CIS shuffle, they're fucked. But otherwise, I think they've got serious potential, and it is just really freaking unfortunate for them that they've got NaVi coming up immediately. Like, if they had a VP, even if they had a Spirit, I'd have them with a fighting chance, right? You'd still be in a similar boat. You're still looking at it and going, probably not. But I'd give them a fighting chance against NaVi. I think they've just drawn arguably the worst possible conclusion for them. Like, they're going to be prepped, they're going to be ready, and they are going to come out guns blazing because they want to win this event. It would be back-to-backs for them if I'm not wrong. They really, really want this. So it's unfortunate. Gambit, I think you can only talk about them so much in this bracket because they're not going to be here for a very long time. But I am really, really looking forward to what they can bring to the table in sort of the next, 6-9 next year. I think they're going to be a really solid team.
Yeah. So in a year, we'll be doing this show in Russian at this rate. It'll just be Russians. It would all be Russians. The whole scene at this rate. I mean, on Shiro alone, like, where the hell did this guy come from? I mean, you can make kind of the same argument. I knew about Dexter for a bit longer, but Shiro is someone for sure that I'd never watched him play at all until a couple months ago. And then for him to come out here and be one of the best players, at least statistically in the tournament, very, very impressive. And he's another one, as we talked about, in terms of his teams overall. Give this guy a year of playing top-level CS. Give him a year of playing against the top AWPers. Give Gambit some tournament invites and get them in some more of these tournaments, even if it's just like the play-in stages or whatever, or the showdowns of Blast, these sort of stuff. Give him every few months another taster of the top level, another taster, another, hopefully alone these sort of things might help a lot with scrims, with like getting scrims and stuff. Just putting in a result like this, you might instantly now be able to play an Astralis in scrims and stuff. So don't underestimate how much this will help them, just like actually punching in a big result on a big stage. Because even though I said previously I thought at some point they would surprise people, that's because at smaller tournaments they've had very encouraging results, beating teams you wouldn't have taken them to beat, especially for their experience level. But now they've actually done it on a real stage and made it to the quarterfinals of a huge event. Top 6 at an IEM Katowice, which if this wasn't online, if this was LAN, like, people would be like orgasming themselves with this like team lineup. Like it would be unbelievable. like I was trying to think about it earlier, if I could actually think of a team, like in terms of having all the top teams, a tournament better than this ever, and I'm not sure I can actually think of one in the history of CS. Even taking the majors, I don't think like you have weird results in the play-ins and the group stages and the minors and stuff. You never actually get the top 16 teams in the end. You normally get the top 10, but the thing about this tournament was like the depth of the field all the way to the bottom level was really, really high. And even as much as we're bashing like a G2 and like an EG, they're still a lot better than teams 20 to 30th in the world. Like, like you just can't get like a Nico level of class in terms of an individual player on those teams. So in terms of the tournament overall, like unbelievable the Gambit can make a top 6 at a tournament this stacked. And for someone like Shiro, like, you know, the only way is up from here, I guess, for someone like him. And I guess we're taking them to lose against NaVi. So say all these nice things, and then 0-2, they might get a map. I wouldn't be gobsmacked. I mean, it's online at the end of the day, so
yeah.
Watch the stream or something, get a map. Right, okay.
Just gonna let that glide, are we? You're just gonna leave that there. Fucking Jesus, Alan. You can't call people out for that shit. They'll come at you on the internet.
I mean, Vitality will be out. They can't do it. Right, where were we? We've got 2 left. We'll save Liquid for last because there'll probably be a fun one to talk about. So we'll just do Virtus.pro. We kind of touched on Virtus.pro by doing all the other teams at this point. In terms of the teams they beat on the runs to the playoffs, that first game versus NaVi was very kind of perplexing. Very odd game. You might have expected them to lose it anyway, so you could give them kind of, you can't take that much away from them in that sense. They were playing NaVi, but that was a really strange result, and it's very indicative to me of it's still a team with quite a lot of development to go, even though I think, are they still 5th ranked in the world or something at the moment? Like they definitely were 5th in the world, and I doubt they've gone down unless
6.
They're 6th. Yeah, okay. Yeah, even that sort of ranking is probably an overestimation. Not necessarily by loads, but for a team like VP, which hasn't played in that many big tournaments, to be in contention now for a top 5 ranking in the world is pretty unbelievable in the first place. And in terms of their results here so far, the Vitality win was impressive. Even though, you know, Apex comes out for 4 days and then comes back in for Katowice. Very strange things happening over there, where clearly whatever got him out in the first place wasn't a big enough deal, or they decided that, you know, Shox actually can't call in these big tournaments. They actually need I don't know, but they did have their proper roster playing here, and even if they've missed out of a week of practice, they still should have been pretty good. So I guess that alone should be a good result. But as I was saying, in terms of real events, they are on a 3-event win streak, so you could take that angle and say that this is, you know, a championship caliber team. But in terms of playing at an IEM Katowice playoffs, like as much as they had to beat some good teams at a Flashpoint or a CS Summit, this is a different kettle of fish. Like to win the tournament, they're probably going to have to beat Astralis, Liquid, and NaVi in consecutive series. Where I'm pretty sure it's going to be a best of 5 final.
Yeah,
like. Well, you got it up against you if you're Virtus.pro. So yeah, in terms of them having a chance to win the tournament, I don't see it really at all. In terms of how this team plays, we talked a bit about it with Spirit on the seeded side. Imagine roughly the same sort of thing. And actually, the thing that happened with Virtus.pro is their T sides right now, statistically, they are the best team in the world on the T side. And obviously, stats are stats. They don't, you know, stats without context are meaningless, but like it still indicates they're a pretty good team on T side nonetheless. And seeing Virtus.pro develop over the last few months has been really incredible on the T side in particular, when definitely, if you're looking at like, I don't know, August, September last year, when they're just getting Yakindo integrated, it was literally the Yakindo Buster show on T side, and on a lot of maps it would just be them going to work and having a lot of space individually, and when they're playing in the CIS tournaments they could just destroy anyone apart from a NaVi basically in those tournaments. So They could just play very reckless, but through these few tournaments and these few tournaments wins, they had developed a lot on the T side, had a lot more depth. But the problem is, it's kind of the same as the Gambit discussion. When you get into this sort of caliber of games, as they're going to be hitting in these series, I'm not sure it's going to be enough. Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be enough going into this Astralis thing. The one angle that I could give them a chance, as I mentioned earlier with Astralis, is the Veto going into this game. I think it's a fairly good Veto for Virtus.pro, and I actually think they have more places they can go with a pick in the series than Astralis can. And it'd be really interesting to see what they do. I mean, I'm willing to bet in the end they just pick Inferno because they like Inferno and they're not really going for a punish pick. But with the day's practice, you might not see that. So in terms of this quarterfinal versus Astralis, I don't think it's totally cut and dry. But I'll be taking Astralis to win it. But hopefully we see a good map pool come out of it and we do get a good series, because that one does have potential to play out well, at least better than the NaVi game did. So hopefully we get a good series from Virtus.pro, and even if they lose it, they go out with a bang to end their tournament.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. They're in a very Gambit-esque situation. They're in an unfortunate spot coming up against some of the best teams they will probably ever face, and a map pool that intersects quite nicely. I think if you're saying they'll pick Inferno, I think if Inferno comes up, in my mind, VP take it at the moment. Personal opinion, I think Yakindar is currently the best T-side rifler on Inferno in the world. I think the way he plays it and his ability to just fucking pick people, like the amount of times I've watched VP and Yakindar will take early banana control against an AWP and then will just straight win that fight with a AK against an AWP is insane. The amount of times you saw it at Summit, and he's continued the form into Katowice. He will just go up banana, and if there is an AWPer there, that AWPer is dead more times than not. That's not a statistic you should find yourself saying. That AWP is there to anchor. That's its job. So the fact that he can do that gives VP so much versatility on their Inferno T side, but that's an argument for a different day. I think they take it against Astralis, sure, but as we've said, this is going to be an Astralis roster that are pissed off, that are looking to perform again and looking to put a lot of the criticisms that we've had about them to bed, prove that they are one of the best teams in the world. Again, I'm not going to say the best team in the world because they're not, but up there in contention, seriously top 3 material, because that's what they expect, right? That's what the organization expects. That's what the players expect. They need to be in that slot and in that groove. So I think they're going to come out pissed off and they're going to come out firing on all cylinders, which is unfortunate for VP. But VP have had one of the most well-rounded series I've seen them have at Katowice. At Summit, it just felt like everything was going their way. Like all the fights they took, all the individuals, they were all firing on all cylinders. Everything was happening, and all of the pieces of the puzzle. It was a Matrix-esque scene, right? Every piece was just perfectly slotting into position, and it was all just working. Here, I think we've seen a really nice second side to VP, especially I'm gonna have to go and drag up the exact game. I think it was against Furia, I want to say, but James had an absolute fucking blinder on one of these series. Was it this one? Yes, it was. I'm right. The Overpass series against Furia. James just went on a freaking tear. And this is a man who, we've had this discussion before. And as much as we rate him, you do talk about him being one of the more passive AWPers in the world. He plays his own brand and he brings his own style to it. And he just went off. And I think for VP, seeing a different side to them really impressed me. Seeing them put in the situation where the fundamentals weren't necessarily clicking as hard. I mean, it was still a 16-14 map. Furia took them all the way on it, but they had a plan B, and that's always been one of the biggest problems in my mind, at least, with some of these CIS rosters with a bit less experience. They have a plan A. They have a very well worked out plan A, but the plan B, the fallback when things aren't working, isn't always there. And it was really nice for me, looking for positives for VP from this, to see them able to come out with a plan B, with Jane going, right, I'm going to start clutching up. I'm going to start making huge plays with the AWP. I mean, just looking at the highlights alone, you've got 4 AWP kills on a defense, 1v2 clutch, 1v2 clutch, 1v3 clutch. Those are situations where Jane, a lot of the time, the community expectation is that he's saving that AWP, right? He's playing a high percentage game. He'll fuck off. he'll go and do whatever. But he's clearly recognized that his team needed him to do something just a little bit different here, a little bit off the cuff. At the time, I'm looking for the exact stats. It was 8-4 apparently. This was on Mirage that he clutched up as well. You know, they're on the back foot. They're struggling a little bit. James gone, right, I need to have an impact here. Big clutch, big round. That's not something they've really relied on before, but it was really nice to see them doing that. And again, it's another team where I want to say, I mean, saying the only way is up is a bit harsh because, as you said, they've fucking peaked at 5 in the world, and I don't think they're going to stay there at the moment. But they've got potential to do some really great things, this VP roster. And again, much like Gambit, if this bracket was different, I could see them making a bit of a run of it, and I could see them realistically, in my mind, they're semi-final caliber at this point. They're the kind of team that I'd expect. Like, if I looked at just out of nowhere, I just looked at the semi-final of an S-tier event and I saw VP, I wouldn't be going, holy shit, how the hell did they get there? I'd be going, okay, yeah, I can see, you know, they could make that reasonably. And I think it's just unfortunate that they've got the draw they have.
Yeah. 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 I think like I like seeing a Virtus.pro in this sort of tournament. I like seeing these sort of storylines playing out because too much people will board hype trains too much on teams in the DreamHack Open events, those sort of events where they're playing Forzas and, you know what I mean? These sort of teams that are top 20 to 30 in the world, and they're just continuously winning these events. And then they go into the top level of play, and people don't realize the level of like distinction between top 20 and top 5 is it's just immeasurable how much better like the 5th best team in the world is than the 20th best team, to be honest. So it makes I always get excited about seeing this sort of storyline playing out. And even if they don't put in the results some people might have expected to seeing the actual team grow and improve through these sort of tournaments, for me, is a more interesting storyline than just winning or it just, you know, there's no movie, well, there may be a Disney movie where they would just show up and win instantly. It wouldn't be a good storyline. You know, they had to play 3 events of going out on the edge of like greatness, and then they get over the hurdle. So, you know, that's interesting to see. In terms of like their world ranking and stuff, I mean, guys, let's be real, like HLTV world ranking is not like a definitive guide of how good a team is like at all. It's actually, I think, like in recent times, more and more people are like accepting it. It's just like gospel of like, this is how good a team is, what their world ranking is on HLTV. And like, guys, it's like an algorithm, and like there's no context at all. It just shoves some numbers in and who they beat. They have like an elo system or whatever, and they just pumps out a result. So, you know, even though their ranking might be falling off in terms of like their true play on the server, their true like how they match up with some of the other top teams, they really can only get better from here. So in that sense, they can still improve. But in terms of this like quarterfinal versus Astralis, you could potentially take an angle of, you know, Astralis did lose to Spirit. Maybe they didn't prep well for that game. What's to say they're going to prep super well for this game? There's some sort of angle you could take potentially if you wanted to play devil's advocate and try and make an argument. But yeah, I'll be taking Astralis. But even so, like, don't be absolutely gobsmacked if Virtus.pro could actually win that game, because they do have the players if they get the right maps, if, you know, they're playing a particular way, if, you know, as much as I bigged up their T sides, maybe their CT sides have some problem. Maybe Jamie's a bit too immobile, maybe needs to move around a bit more. Maybe someone like Yakindar still makes too many mistakes, and, you know, he's got more to learn. So I wouldn't be absolutely gobsmacked if they won it, but even if they did, they've got just a death row of teams going on from that point anyway. So Virtus.pro, this is probably last we're going to see of them in this tournament, is in this quarterfinal. But from their perspective, in terms of whatever their world ranking is anyway, this is a good result for them in the first place. Again, the whole tournament is so stacked, and anyone who did think their world ranking was like ludicrously overrated because of the smaller tournaments they've been winning, well, this is proof enough that they're definitely a top 8 team minimum. And moving forward, if they have a good result here, now we can have a conversation about top 5, and maybe we can see them develop through some top tournaments. And if it's for nothing else, I really hope Virtus.pro starts getting invites now to some of the bigger events, because they do deserve it at this point. And again, as we said a few times already, get this team playing 10 pretty big events over a year, and they're only going to get better. And they're going to put some of these European teams to shame that have much bigger budget and much more experienced players. So good stuff, VP. We might not see much more of them, but I'm fairly happy with how they, outside of the NaVi game, they've looked fairly good, and hopefully moving forward, we can just continue this kind of fairy tale story of some of these CIS teams in general. Okay, is it just Liquid left?
Yeah, that's the last one.
So you've spoken fairly highly of the Liquid boys. We've heard they've had an in-game leader swap. Now it is apparently Fallen calling. Stewie's moved back to a more individual role, which we spoke about it, I think, probably in the first episode, that, I didn't see Stewie calling as a long-term solution, and Fallen moving into the calling spot was something I anticipated from the start with this team, and it makes a lot of sense in the first place. So they make this swap, they have a good result. Obviously, even if there might be a small asterisk, they still did beat probably the best team in the world to make it into these playoffs. They're already in the semi-finals, and presumably they're going to play Astralis. So tell me, what do you think of Liquid? Why have they been playing well? Was this move to make Fallen the in-game leader? Was this, a done deal? Did they have to make this move? And I guess what do you expect going into that semi and potentially the final for this squad?
So it had to happen. I think you're absolutely right. Stewie was not a long-term fix for an in-game leader. And we've almost, as much as it's a honeymoon period, I'm still going to reference it, we've almost seen a return to form from Stewie, just from having the pressure removed on. I mean, I think they said he was still calling on Nuke until very recently, but Fallen had picked up the other 6 maps. So even removing, 6/7 of the total pressure on him as an in-game leader, we've seen almost a resurgence to form, and just to him playing the game how we all know he can play it. We've seen it before, Smoke Criminal. We've seen all of those montages of the nutty shit he can do. And he started to find that form again. And I think for Liquid, that's obviously fantastic. It's really started to build them back up into being a team who I consider in serious contention of taking these kind of events, because they did have that period where they had Nitro going off and they brought Grim in, and it just didn't seem to work as much as I saw a few people, I can't remember exact names, saying that you don't need an AWPer anymore. You can get away with 5 hybrid rifles, but I can't disagree more. As much as your AWPer does need to be able to rifle, I think an AWPer is still an integral part of any good CS team. I think if you don't have an AWPer, there is always a glass ceiling that's just going to keep you below a certain level if you haven't got a guy who you can go, you're our AWPer, go nuts. Even if it's someone like Fallen, who, despite bringing back some pretty vintage moments and nearly pulling off some clutches, was pretty near the bottom of the scoreboard. Obviously, Fallen's kind of a unique case in that he's picking up the AWP and he's picking up the in-game leading responsibilities. It's almost a paradox, because we always talk about in-game leaders sacrificing frags for team play and information gathering, and probably looking at the minimap and then getting shot in the head because they caught an awkward timing. And we talk about that constantly. And then we also talk about how the AWP is one of the most expensive weapons in the game, and to justify picking it up, you've got to have an AWPer who's having an impact on these sort of rounds. But Fallen seems to almost defy that expectation of an AWPer, and he just walks this tightrope of having impact when it's required, but allowing the teammates, you use the phrase space a lot. I think he allows his teammates the space to play their style of Counter-Strike, and then just adds little bits here and there, right? He's like the spice on the end of a meal. He's the salt and pepper. He's not the bulk of it, but when he's required, he will do what is needed. And that's exactly what Liquid needed, if you ask me. They had lots of talent, but nobody to knit it together, nobody to be the glue in that roster. And that's why picking up Fallen really excited me. I looked at it, I went, okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you take the pressure off of Stewie, he becomes the glue player. He slots all these pieces together and makes it work. And we've seen it happen, right? It's been scrappy, don't get me wrong. They dropped a map to Vitality. Obviously, the third map of Inferno was an absolute banger against NaVi, but the tournament as a whole, they 16-7'd on D2. And honestly, I was watching it live, I thought, okay, Liquid are done. So they take Overpass 16-14, and it is seriously tight to get there. Then they go to Dust 2 and NaVi just demolish them on their map pick. And I'm like, okay, NaVi, their overpass maybe isn't up to scratch. Maybe they haven't practiced it enough. Maybe they didn't prep it enough, right? But they've come out on Dust 2 and they've gone, okay, we're NaVi, fuck you, 16-7, done. And I went, that's it. NaVi they're gonna keep that momentum. They're gonna keep steamrolling. And I think for Liquid to come back into that game and instantly post 10 T-side rounds against NaVi on Inferno is huge, right? It shows a lot of mental resilience. It shows the ability to come back into a game. And it also shows that they weren't fucking out of it after second map, which is what I was expecting. So they've really defied my expectations in terms of how quickly they've become that kind of roster. Because normally, in my mind, if you swap out your IGL, there's going to be a period where players are going to get pissed off because the system isn't working currently, right? So you've just got rid of Stewie. Fallen is now calling. In my mind, if they get clobbered 16-7 on Dust 2, there's at least a little voice in the back of their heads going, that's because Fallen's new and he's calling a bit shit on Dust 2 at the moment. He doesn't understand how we play it. And then there's a bit of tilt that comes in with that. Obviously, NA tilting is an old fucking adage, but it can apply. So to come back in the way they did, to pull out the huge rounds that they did, for Grim as well, to have an individual performance like he did, absolutely huge. I don't think you can state it enough for Grim. He's, in my mind, been just a little quiet for my liking on Liquid. He's not... I watched him at the Global Challenge when he was playing for Triumph in 2019, and he looked nuts. Like, he was this, you could see what he had. You could see he was this incredible rifler with so much just raw skill and raw potential. And you went, put him on a roster and he's going to bang. And then he went just a little quiet. I'm not saying he didn't have big impactful series, but for me, he wasn't that player. And this series was almost, I'm not going to say entirely because he didn't have a God series. He's still fourth on the scoreboard overall and third on Inferno, but there were flashes of it. And I think that's what Liquid need, is flashes of brilliance, because you've got a NAF and a Liege, a Stewie 2K who's no longer in-game leading. You don't need Grim to be this complete madman on the rifle. You've got three players who are perfectly fucking capable of it. You need him to have flashes of brilliance. He did. It worked well with Fallen. Stewie had the pressure taken off. And I just got really fucking excited about Liquid. I think everyone did on Twitter, right, when they pulled it off. But it looked like a system that I could buy into immediately. And that's why I'm saying I think they can take Astralis. It's good. I'm buying into it. I think they've made the perfect calls at the perfect time. And props to Moses for making those kind of calls. They've got a system now that I think can really excel for them.
Yeah, well, as a team, like, they're a team that screams of like the power of putting people in the right roles, which I don't know, for example, several iterations of FaZe or previously Kinguin G2, they're a great example of a team that you just chuck a load of players in and doesn't make any sense, and roles don't make any sense. And I'm guessing with this team, with the Fallen move, I'm guessing it was always planned that Fallen was going to move into cooling, or at least they thought it was a heavy possibility, and the whole idea was that, they'd play a few months, or we could have a lot of scrims to get used to the rounds they wanted to run, or, it might have been a very shrewd move by Moses to not let Fallen come in and just imprint his own system from the first place, to instead let him play under the current system of Liquid and then build off that. If that was a choice, I have no idea. If that was a choice by Moses, that is very, very shrewd, seeing how the MIBR team kind of fell apart in the end, and obviously Fallen was calling the whole game and setting up the whole game to an extent, so he certainly had issues at that point in terms of setting up a system. So if they had made the call in the first place to take this direction and then eventually transition into Fallen calling once he's kind of up to speed with how they wanted to play, or how this certain, the sort of rounds they want to be running, or how to make use of a certain player in a certain spot, whatever it was, if that was the plan come in, that is a really amazing decision making. And now when Fallen's moved into calling, we don't know exactly when it happened, I don't think, but assuming now he is calling on 6 maps, instantly looks like an upgrade, doesn't it? Certainly versus what we saw from Liquid some of those Blast games. So immediately a much improved team, and that just role wise it makes perfect sense, this squad now. And as much as we looked at the twist move coming out and we said, okay, you have lost a fairly good piece there, at least role wise, bringing Fallen, full-time AWPer, we've got the anchors settled in, we've got the rotators, NAF and the Liege there, some of the absolute best rotators in the world. Like, it's all kind of clicking. And any questions we had have fallen individually. At least in this tournament so far, it's been really lights out on an individual level, which probably would have been my biggest question of this fallen move. So a lot of people would criticize how the MIBR team fell apart in the end and how he was setting up that whole team, and he was probably making a lot of the calls and a lot of how they were playing. But in my opinion, I was always fairly confident he was going to get it together on a team level as long as he had a good organization around him. And hopefully, even if someone like Moses isn't a monster tactician, hopefully outside of the server he can at least be a calling figure and fall in the right direction, or say this is how we're going to do this, and be like be an authority on terms of how they're going to play. So in terms of the whole system of how the whole team's interacting inside and outside of the game, it just looks like a much more kind of cohesive unit, certainly during this tournament alone. And as I said, don't underestimate the power of just putting people in the right roles. And you'll probably see the same with FaZe in a few tournaments once they get their act together with Karrigan. You'll almost certainly see exactly the same thing happening again, where, there's certainly a case that this FaZe lineup might be a skill downgrade on some of the ones they've had in the last few years, but they just will outperform them because they've got people in the right spots. They've got a competent in-game leader. They've got, people are put in positions where their skill set suited to it, or they played this way in the past, or you're emphasizing the strengths of players rather than having people kind of shoehorned into spots to try and fill a gap. And that's what I see with this Liquid squad, where for the longest time, even on the not having an AWPer topic, it was kind of like they had a lot of versatile players, so we'll sort of make it work, and we'll put players in these spots. They might not work here super long term, but at least for the next few tournaments, these spots are going to work. They can play super well. They're very adaptable. It's going to work. But as we've seen it play out over the years, when someone like Nitro started to have issues with AWPing, then immediately they've got a problem. What are we going to do? We're going to move the AWP around? Is Nitro going to stay cooling? Like, how is this all going to work? And they end up having to remove Nitro. This Fallen deal takes a long time to come through, so they have that flux period which you talked about from the Nitro move to getting Grim in, where it's just like, it just wasn't all clicking, or they didn't have all the pieces yet. And finally now we've actually got all the pieces in. Fallen's finally in the team. He's back to cooling. So in terms of like excitement level for a Liquid being back, and we obviously know what they were capable of with the previous lineup with Nitro. Like, finally it feels like we have a lineup that could do it again and could be a real contender for these kind of big events. So that's almost certainly the most exciting thing about the results so far, and especially even if I'm saying that there might be a case that NaVi were the better team in that series to win the group, they still beat NaVi. They beat NaVi. Yeah. They took an Inferno off NaVi to win it, when Inferno's a very strong map for NaVi, and they've played a lot of big finals recently. They can play Inferno at a very high level, and to get that one over the line in the end was very impressive. So for Liquid, I'm not necessarily going to pick them to win this tournament, but in terms of the overall trajectory of the team, in terms of how it's all coming together and role-wise how it's looking, and potentially Fallen cooling moving forwards, there's a lot of things to like about this team, and hopefully they can stay at a good level and potentially make up for where potentially someone like a Vitality might be falling out of the top at the moment. So we can actually retain, 3 or 4 teams are really battling for these tournaments, because if we get the right teams coming together now, then we get straight fire like playoffs in every tournament, whereas in this one potentially a team like Spirit and Gambit, for example, as much as they played really great CS here, we do really want to see an informed Vitality in this playoffs. We want to see a FaZe up to speed. Like, as much as they played great CS to make it here, I want to see the best lineups, the most tenured lineups, the ones with the most depth actually making it to these playoffs. I mean, in general, bit of a tangent here. Like, I hate group stage upsets. Like, in general, like, I only hope for survival in group stages of the top teams, so that when we get to the playoffs, they're really good. Because I've just seen so many tournaments over the years where 1 or 2 even best of 1 results just fuck the entire bracket. And the amount of majors they've just had like out of whack brackets, or the 2 best teams in the world playing in the quarterfinals because of fucking what's a good one? Flipside winning a map at DreamHack Winner 2014 and making it a Fnatic NV quarterfinal, and then Fnatic going down heavily on Overpass, and then Olofmeister boosting, This is what happens because of group stage upsets. There you go. Put that on Reddit. Because of group stage upsets, we get game breaking bugs being released. I can't remember the overall point I was making anymore, but you know,
You hate
I can't
groups.
even remember the point I was making, but you know, I do actually. I remember that. Like Liquid getting their act together with a lineup that makes sense role-wise is a good sign in general for the scene, because hopefully we've got some other teams that now we made the changes, we get them together role-wise, and then all the teams can be bigger than the sum of their parts, and we can have straight fire playoffs. But I guess the final thing to talk about with Liquid is the predictions. So assuming they're playing Astralis, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think I'd still, again, until I've seen Astralis play in these playoffs, I can't, you know, it obviously might change my opinion at the time. I'd say it's, even now I'm going in and out. I think I'll take Astralis, yeah. I'll take Astralis, as much as they've had a few problems. I still think Astralis could just show up and be the best team in the world. I wouldn't be gobsmacked if they just show up and just front run the whole way to the final, even though they lost, you know, for example, even though they lost to NaVi in the grand final of the Glass Global finals. Up to that grand final, they looked incredible. And it was only in that final where they had a bit of a falling apart. And even though last they lost to ZTR and all that and NiP, I still could see a world where they come in great form. But either way, it doesn't matter for me so much. I mean, I tend to be like, I don't actually care who wins. I just want to see good games, and I just want the better team to get out of this side of the bracket and then play a NaVi or potentially a very informed Spirit in the final, and let's just have some absolutely killer CS, because, you know, we deserve a good tournament after all this online stuff. And to be honest, this is probably the tournament I've been most excited about for a while. I don't know why. I can't exactly put my finger on it. It might be the teams. It might be. I think this break actually helps a lot with getting excited for the playoffs. If it was just a day after, like, it would just be a continuation, wouldn't it? It'd just be you wouldn't have any time to reset or think about the storyline. So you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have time to process that Liquid had kind of got things together and they made an in-game leader change. You just go straight into the playoffs and you wouldn't be able to think about it to the end. So it's all good fun. I'll take Astralis to make the final and play NaVi and NaVi to win it if I had to guess my results. But I could certainly see a world where Liquid makes it and hopefully the best team gets out of this half of the bracket.
Yeah, I've got to take Liquid, I think, personally. But in my mind, it's sort of 55-45, depending on how Astralis show up, right? Because it always is the question. We know what they can do. Are they going to do it again? I think NaVi's still to win the tournament for sure, but Astralis could put up some serious resistance. And honestly, I just want to see the new boys taking maps. I want to see Spirit take a map off NaVi in the semi. I want to see Gambit take a map off NaVi in the quarters just to give them a boot up the arse. And I want to see Astralis losing a map to VP. I want to see close games. And to be fair, Katowice is the first tournament in a while for me that's delivered like all of these games that I've actually had to just sit up and watch. I don't know. It's weird with COVID in it, man. We've played so much fucking CS simultaneously. It got so boring. And it feels like Katowice has really hit a vein of genuinely fantastic CS games combined with a nice schedule gap. I think as much as you're saying it's great that they've got a nice little gap between the groups and the finals, if another TO had come and jammed something in,
yes,
in that gap,
that's the risk. That's the risk.
Is the risk, right?
We get like a blast showdown in the middle of this or something.
Fucking exactly. Someone just comes in and jams a 3-day event in there. Then all of a sudden, that gap becomes a massive detriment, right? Because you're jumping and you're paying attention to different tournaments, and inevitably it'd be a completely different fucking look to all of these teams in insert random tournament name here, and all these points would be thrown out the window. So I think they've got a little lucky that the other TOs have respected them, but it's worked out brilliantly, and I do hope. Obviously, we've now got a little bit of hope coming out the window, you know, topical news and all that shit. We've started to get exit plans here in the UK. I'm sure other countries are starting to work their shit out as well. So there is hope of LAN again. There is, you know, this idea that we will be getting back to it. But for the next 6 months, can we just all play nice? Can we just all give each other breaks when we need them? And stop just cramming so much goddamn CSing, because then it will be exciting again. And that's what Katowice was for me. It was exciting. And that's the first time in a while, man.
Yeah, I think, to my knowledge, the UK is the furthest ahead in terms of the COVID vaccines. I'm pretty sure we are
Okay.
quite well. I think Israel's really far ahead, but they're a much smaller population, of course. But like the UK is pretty much as far. Like I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's once we get back to land, some of them might even be in the UK. I don't know. I don't know who would host it, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the UK is a common place for some of these tournaments. But yeah, I kind of felt the same about Cologne actually last year as I do about Katowice here. Cologne was just after the player break, I think, so they would have had the advantage that anyway. It wouldn't have been a crazy tournament circuit in the lead up, but. I don't know exactly. It might be a kind of a nostalgia factor. Of course, Katowice is a long running event and all that. But in the absence of majors, what else do we really have to kind of up the stakes? Because as much as, you know, prize money and stuff like this and formats and stuff help elevate a tournament, you know, there's like, what's a really good example? Like the Monaco Grand Prix, for example, is actually a trash race every year. Like it's actually like garbage, the actual race that plays out. The qualifying is good, but the race is like trash. But like everyone hypes it up and it's like, it's one of the... They have a triple crown of Monaco Indy 500 and Le Mans is like the races that every like driver aspires to win in their career. Even the top drivers, very few manage to win all of these. So that's kind of the same vein I see Katowice in, where regardless of prize money or format, it just comes with a bit more kind of what's the word?
Prestige?
Yeah. And especially during this online period where, you know, DreamHack's resorted to naming their tournaments like DreamHack December and DreamHack January because there's just no other like distinguishing factor. The only distinguishing factor is what month of the year we're playing these tournaments in. And to actually have, I mean, this is a good tangent. Like when I was on the stream with Semler, we were watching the start of the group stages for Katowice. They have a really weird like desk setup where it's like green screened out. I don't know if you've watched the desks really at all, but it does look a bit jarring where I'm pretty sure it's all CGI and it's all like green screened around them. It all looks a bit weird and they've like put a picture of the Spodek in the background. Like it's all a bit odd. I don't really know why they bothered them, just use a normal studio, but for me that sort of stuff doesn't matter. It's just the fact that I don't know, maybe it's just the time of the year. This is just like Katowice time of the year. Middle of February going into March. So yes, I think we've covered all the teams there. I guess to summarize, the rough predictions are going to be NaVi pretty clear favourites, I think, even with the Spirit result on that side of the bracket. On the other side of the bracket, we're expecting potentially VP Astralis to be close, but we're taking Astralis, and then regardless of who wins that Liquid Astralis semi, at least from that perspective, we'll know that going into the grand final, we've got a killer team out of that half of the bracket. So hopefully, going into the grand final, we can have a really good one, because I can't think of a grand final that's lived up really well in the last... I can't think of one for a while that's been really, really good. We've had a lot of blowouts, and for example, the NaVi Astralis one, which could have been really good at Blast Global Finals, that one just sort of fell flat. So hopefully, and I'm pretty sure this one's best of 5. So hopefully we actually get a really killer series, go super close, and if we get anything like the NaVi Liquid finish, like. We could be breaking, we could be reaching like major level like viewer numbers on an online tournament, which would just be like absolutely unbelievable. So, yes. Anything to add on to those predictions?
I think we've pretty much hit the nail on the head. NaVi are going to win it. I want to see Liquid do well, and it's a shame the CIS rosters are where they are, but it's good to have top tier, seriously competitive CS back. And as much as you're blaming the scuffed ass desk, it still is better than nothing, man. It's nice to have.
It's just a bit odd. I don't know why they're not just using like a normal studio, but whatever.
I think it from what I understand of it, because I think I've been to the office where they're running it out of Cologne for Katowice last year. So they've got a really little dinky studio there, which is what me, Vince, Tom, and Jason did it out of Katowice B stream last year.
As in just the caster's desk, and then like a
so it's
like
a tiny
LED
desk
screen or something behind.
Well, it's a tiny little desk, and it's got just glass behind it, and you can just see into the offices.
Oh, right, okay.
But from what I understand, basically what they've done is right behind that, you've got like a big row of chairs and PCs. maybe 15 long on each side.
Yes.
And they've just ripped that out completely, jammed a desk in the middle of that, and shoved a massive green screen all the way around it.
Oh, I see. So they literally, So it is kind of, this is like a compromise where they might not be able to get a good kind of, I guess if that's the reason, fair dues, the assumption I had was that they were, the ESL probably would have already had a studio ready to go. But
yeah,
apparently they don't. But Adam, what have they been using for like all the other tournaments then?
So they always set up wherever they're at, right? Normally, if it's LAN, they've got the A streams.
Yeah, but for the online ones, they've had that desk. They had the same desk for all the tournaments.
Yeah, so it's literally they just green screen shit onto it. It's this fuck off block of desk, right, with a huge green screen behind it, and it's always the same shape of desk. It's just different, like logos and crap. So they're using this one setup and just using it to death. But honestly, I like it. I just like having a desk that's people in the same location. It's a bit jarring for an A stream of, a big event to have casters casting from home. Even if you green screen it as best you can, you're working with what you've got, right? The kit's not going to be as good. The lighting's a bit crap. I mean, fucking look at this shit I've got going on to try and get this working. It's never going to be the same. So even if it is a bit scuffed, even if the desk is a bit cracked, even if the green screen background has a weird rolling video of a corner of the spodek, for me, it's better than nothing, man. I'll take it, especially when the CS is this good.
Oh, I'm definitely happy they're actually in a studio. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I don't think many people would watch even the same analyst just doing it on this sort of format for a desk would be very odd. And I could just speak from the Flashpoint perspective. That's a massive part of they always wanted it to be a studio. And to my knowledge, they're not really interested in running an event where it wasn't in a studio and they couldn't have the creative freedom. The amount of freedom you have when you actually have everyone in the same place, you could never make skits over the internet. It's just impossible. So I think we've covered everything. Those are our predictions. Comments, whatever, down below. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me everything. We should have a guest next time, and yes, we'll be doing the reflection, I guess, on this. So we'll be able to talk to where VP wins the tournament and Gambit 16-0 Astralis or something in the final. We'll be able to come on, or Spirit just wins Dust 2 against everyone. We'll be able to come back on. We'll be able to reflect, but. I think that's it from me. Is that it from you as well, Wolfie? Are we all done?
Yeah, we're good.
That's it. We'll catch you guys next time, hopefully with a guest, probably towards the start of next week. Peace out.